because what is actually the change? And this is what he asked, right? Is what happened there? Why? Why will it actually respond? Why will our postsynaptic cell suddenly now respond more to the same exact stimuli? What change is going on? So now what we're doing is we're zooming in right here. Okay? So now I'm looking at this. Okay? So we're zooming in and we're looking at our synapse here. And we want to know what change happened here. Okay? So we know that when a cell fires, and let's talk about glutamate, because glutamate is our major excitatory neurotransmitter, right? It will always make a cell fire. Okay? When a cell releases glutamate, we know that it binds to a neurotransmitter, right? And that neurotransmitter lets sodium in. Remember sodium? Right? Sodium, remember at the door? Right? And somebody opens it and all these positivity comes in. Right? And that causes a depolarization. Remember that? Okay, so we know that when glutamate binds, it opens up a sodium channel and sodium comes in and it causes some positivity in here. Right? And it makes the cell more or less likely to fire. We know that. Okay? So you know that, and that particular receptor for our glutamate, and you didn't know this before, these were called AMPA receptors. So our regular run-of-the-mill receptor is going to be called an AMPA receptor. Okay? But there's different types of receptors here. So it turns out that our LTP doesn't work really it's not dependent on the AMPA receptor. What it's dependent on is a completely different type of receptor called an NMDA receptor. Okay, so you have this NMDA receptor. And with the NMDA receptor, yes, glutamate binds to it. But if glutamate binds to it, that's not enough to make that receptor actually open its ion channel. So for our NMDA receptor to work, two conditions have to be met. So for our NMDA receptor, two conditions have to be met. Number one, glutamate has to bind to that receptor. Okay, and we already see that happening. Right? So glutamate binds to it. But number two, our postsynaptic cell, this guy right here, our postsynaptic cell, has to already be slightly depolarized. It has to be a little bit positive. Okay? So this is why our tetanus works, right? Because we fire. Some of that causes the cell to actually fire, right, and get excited. And then that allows, while that's happening, glutamate is still binding. And so you have this cell that's excited, and you have glutamate binding. So that's why the tetanus works. So this really fast input, right? And so if you have those two conditions met, then our NMDA receptor will actually open up its channel. And it turns out its channel is not sodium. So our AMPA receptor is sodium, right? Its channel allows calcium in. So this channel actually allows calcium in. Okay. And calcium does all kinds of interesting things in the cell. So once calcium is in, it triggers this chemical cascade of events to happen, okay? Which includes creating protein kinase C and calcium modulated protein kinase 2, which are just called CAM2. Okay. from now on. Right? So CAM2, CAMK2. So protein kinase C, CAMK2 get made when calcium comes in. Okay? So calcium comes in, it triggers these two kinases to be made, and then what happens? So first of all, both protein kinase C and CAMK2 will both go to existing AMPA receptors and phosphorylize them. All right, what does that mean? So here we have our AMPA receptors here, right? Let's say we have a couple AMPA receptors here. So CAMK2, let's say we have calcium come in. Here's our calcium, and it triggers. Let's say it triggers our CAMK2. CAMK2 will go here to an existing AMPA receptor. So this AMPA receptor already exists, and it will phosphorylize it. So I'm going to put a little happiness on it with a little shiny mark, right? So it's phosphorylized AMPA receptor. Still an AMPA receptor, but it's phosphorylized. What does that mean? Phosphorylation makes our sodium go in more. So remember, this is a sodium channel, right? If we allow more sodium in every time it opens, that means more depolarization, right? Which means increased efficiency, right? So every time now that's glutamate binds to this, way more sodium comes in, and you get way more positivity. Yeah. No. So the phosphorylation actually attracts those.
It increases its affinity.
Yeah. It'll attract it and make it go through the channel. So there's the phosphorylation right here. So here's our calcium coming in. These are our kinases, right? Both protein kinase C and CAMK2, and they go up to existing AMPA receptors and they phosphorylize. Okay? And phosphorylation makes more sodium come in every time that thing opens now. Beautiful, right? So there's your increased efficiency, right? What else? It will also, and this is what CAMK2 does in particular, CAMK2 will also go kind of to the same synapse. It'll go like over here somewhere. And it says, hey, we should put a new AMPA receptor there. And it'll put a little tag there. And whenever a little tag exists, what that means is DNA protein synthesis will start to happen. So the actual DNA will be expressed, right? Protein gets made. Remember, DNA is just the blueprint, right? The recipe for you, right? The recipe for some proteins in your body, right? So when a synaptic tag is there, it triggers protein synthesis, which will allow the cell to put a new AMPA receptor there. So, number one, the existing AMPA receptors get phosphorylized, so they're super AMPA receptors. Number two, a new AMPA receptors get put in, right? And the more AMPA receptors, just think about it, which is more sensitive, this cell or this cell? This one, right? Because if glutamate gets released, a lot of them have the option of binding to the cell, which means there's way more places for sodium to come in and make that cell depolarize and eventually make that cell fire, right? So more AMPA receptors mean more sensitivity, okay? bucket. So you now understand LTP. Yay! So what does this mean for real life, right? Does this actually work in terms of memory? Okay. So it turns out that you can trigger LTP more easily in areas that are important for memory. So memory areas are really good at it's easy to induce LTP in memory cortex. Okay, so that's the one form of evidence, right? Another one is the plasticity of the synapses will follow the same rules as memory. So let me give you some examples of that. So it turns out that if you inject an NMDA receptor blocker, right? You block NMDA receptors, right? So you make NMDA receptors not work. You actually end up blocking memory. So if you inject a rat with NMDA receptors, they look like they can't form memories. That's huge evidence that LTP is responsible for memory, right? Also, you can get animals that have knockout genes. So you can actually have an animal that doesn't make CAMK2, for example. And if they don't make CAMK2, that means this whole process is a little deficient, right? I mean, they still get calcium in there. They still have the protein kinase C, right? But they're not doing CAMK2, which means they're having less of those new AMPA receptors put in, and they're having less phosphorylation. And in fact, these rats will show deficits. Number one, in even inducing LTP. So if you take out their neurons and put them in a dish, it's hard to induce LTP. Number two, and probably more important for your behavior, is those rats tend to show really bad memory. Finally, you can genetically engineer rats that have more NMDA receptors. And these rats are super learners. So the more NMDA receptors you have, the more likely this process is to be triggered, and the more likely you are to create memories. So you're more easily able to create these memories, and that's what this too. So there's a lot of evidence pointing to this idea that LTP is actually what's conserving a lot of memory processes. Is it good? Yes? Are you happy? Have you noticed that? You're going to walk across campus, you're like, I'm the only one that knows about LTP. What? All right, so good luck on your test. If you have any questions, let me know. And Brian's going to be posting. I tried to stay in this section because I think Brian created an audio